Chosen one. Stop scrolling. If you've been feeling watched, talked about, or suddenly treated differently, this message is for you. People don't whisper about those who are stagnant. They whisper about those who are changing quietly. They underestimated you. They thought they had you figured out. But lately, something shifted. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped reacting the way you used to. You got quieter, sharper, more focused. And that made them nervous. They can feel you pulling away from their influence. They sense you're about to rise, even if they can't explain how or why. That's why the energy around you feels tense. That's why old connections feel distant. That's why new doors feel closer than ever. This isn't coincidence. This is confirmation. If this resonates, don't skip ahead. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will explain why this phase feels so intense and how to move through it without losing momentum. And if you're ready to step fully into who you're becoming, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and comment, "I'm ready." This message didn't find you by accident. For a long time, people believed they had you figured out. They watched your patterns, listened to your words, and quietly decided who you were and how far you would go. In their minds, your future had limits, and those limits felt comfortable to them. You were expected to stay in your lane, move at an acceptable pace, and never disrupt the order they were used to. They assumed predictability meant safety. They thought you would remain exactly where they placed you. Never too loud, never too ambitious, never too threatening. You were supposed to follow the path that was already drawn, not question it, not rewrite it. And because you didn't argue or announce your intentions, they believed you agreed with their expectations. But what they failed to understand is that silence does not mean compliance. It often means observation. You noticed everything. The advice that came wrapped as concern, but carried quiet limitations. The jokes that sounded harmless, but were edged with doubt. The moments when people slowly stopped asking about your dreams, as if they had already decided those dreams didn't matter. These weren't accidents. They were reflections of how small they believed your potential was. They labeled you early, because labeling makes people feel in control. Once they decide who you are, they feel safe. They stop paying attention. And that was their greatest mistake. While they spoke confidently about what could and couldn't be done, you listened. While they rushed to prove themselves, you slowed down to understand the bigger picture. While they chased attention and approval, you focused on awareness. You were learning people, patterns, and timing. You were studying what worked, what failed, and why. Your intelligence didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. You didn't rely on noise to feel powerful. You understood something many never do. Real intelligence moves quietly. It waits. It watches. It gathers strength before it reveals direction. They mistook your patience for hesitation. They confused your humility with a lack of ambition. They saw your calm nature and assumed there was no fire behind it. But calm was never the absence of power. It was control. You were never behind. You were building foundation. You were sharpening your instincts. You were preparing for a version of life that required precision, not impulse. And preparation always looks invisible to those who don't understand depth. Then, something shifted. Your words began to carry weight. When you spoke, people listened differently. Your decisions stopped feeling random and started feeling intentional. You no longer explained yourself the way you used to. You didn't seek approval before acting. Your presence changed, not louder, not aggressive, but grounded. That's when the whispers started. Not encouragement, not admiration, concern. because people can feel when someone they underestimated is no longer operating from uncertainty. They sense when someone has stepped into clarity, and clarity is dangerous to those who relied on your self-doubt to feel secure. Underestimated people are powerful not because they seek revenge, but because they move without needing permission. They don't rush, they don't panic, they don't need to prove anything. When they finally act, it's not impulsive, it's precise. And once that clarity activates, there's no going back. They didn't lose control because you changed who you are. They lost control because you finally recognized who you've always been. There comes a quiet but unmistakable moment when people realize they no longer have access to you. Not access to your time or your presence, but access to your thoughts, emotions, and decisions. This shift doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with confrontation or dramatic exits. It arrives subtly, through your restraint. You stopped oversharing. You no longer feel the need to explain every decision or justify every choice. You don't narrate your struggles or broadcast your plans. What once felt like openness now feels like exposure, and you chose protection instead. That alone signals growth. Your energy changed. You're no longer reactive. You don't jump to defend yourself, correct misunderstandings, or chase conversations that drain you. You became selective. And selectivity is threatening to those who once benefited from your emotional availability. Influence is power. When people can affect how you feel, how you act, or how you see yourself, they hold leverage. For a long time, some people had that leverage over you. They could pull reactions out of you. They could trigger doubt. They could redirect your focus with a few words or opinions. Now, they can't. You don't argue the way you used to. You don't feel the need to win every point or prove your intelligence. You don't chase validation or clarity from people who aren't invested in your growth. And most noticeably, you don't doubt yourself the way you once did. Instead, you pause. You observe the situation before responding. You choose whether engagement is worth your energy. You walk away calmly from conversations, dynamics, and environments that once controlled your emotions. What used to feel urgent now feels optional. This is intelligence at a high level. Not just intellectual intelligence, but emotional intelligence, strategic intelligence, self-mastery. The kind that understands restraint is often more powerful than reaction. People whisper when they feel their relevance fading. They sense the distance growing, even if nothing dramatic has happened. They notice they no longer get the same reactions. Their words don't land the way they used to. Their presence doesn't influence your decisions, and that makes them uncomfortable. They start asking quiet questions they never had to ask before. Why doesn't this affect them anymore? Why aren't they reacting? Why do they seem so calm, so unbothered, so self-directed? What they're really asking is why they no longer matter in the same way. The truth is simple, but not easy to accept. You learned something most people never do. Access is earned, not owed. Not everything deserves your response. Not everyone deserves your energy. Not every battle deserves your participation. You realized that engagement without alignment is a loss, not a virtue. You didn't become distant because you stopped caring. You became discerning because you started caring about the right things. You stopped pouring energy into people and situations that drained you and began investing it where it could grow. To those who relied on your confusion, your openness, or your emotional reactions, this feels like a threat. Clarity disrupts dynamics built on uncertainty. Self-trust breaks cycles of influence. Calm detachment removes leverage. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. and clarity is dangerous to those who thrived on your self-doubt. Silence has a way of revealing insecurity in others, especially when that silence comes from someone they know is capable. When words disappear but progress doesn't, people start to feel uneasy. They can't read you the way they used to, and uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. You stopped announcing your plans, not because you stopped having them, but because you learned that not everyone needs access to your direction. You stopped seeking reassurance because you no longer needed permission to move forward. You stopped needing applause because validation from others stopped being the fuel that drove you. And now they're guessing. They wonder what you're working on behind the scenes. They question what you might know that they don't. They notice your confidence, but can't trace it to anything you've said. That quiet certainty unsettles people who rely on constant communication to feel secure. Here's the truth. Most never learn. Movement doesn't need an audience. Real progress happens when focus replaces explanation, when energy goes into execution instead of announcement. You realize that sharing too much invites interference, opinions, and unnecessary pressure. Silence, on the other hand, creates space. Space to think clearly, space to adjust without scrutiny, space to grow without interruption. You also learned that protection sometimes looks like privacy. Not everyone deserves insight into your plans, your process, or your mindset. Privacy isn't secrecy rooted in fear. It's discernment rooted in wisdom. You chose to protect what matters by limiting access to it. Power grows fastest in quiet environments. Without noise, you hear yourself more clearly. Without constant feedback, you trust your own judgment. Without outside influence, your decisions become sharper and more intentional. Silence strengthens alignment. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. It's the depth of thought that comes from observation rather than reaction. It's the calculation that considers long-term impact instead of short-term satisfaction. It's the awareness that understands timing matters as much as action. It's discipline, the kind that resists the urge to explain and chooses to let results speak. People whisper because they no longer have access to your thoughts. They can't predict your next move. They can't gauge your intentions through conversation or reaction. And unpredictability, when paired with intelligence, is deeply unsettling to those who depend on control. Control thrives on information. It requires access. When you stop giving that access freely, influence weakens. People who once felt comfortable around you start to feel uncertain, not because you've changed toward them, but because they no longer understand you. You're not trying to intimidate anyone. You're not playing a game or sending a message. You're simply focused. Focused people often appear distant to those who are used to constant interaction. But distance isn't disconnection, it's direction. Your growth speaks louder than explanations ever could. It shows in how you move, how you decide, how you handle situations that once triggered emotion. There's a steadiness in you now, a calm confidence that doesn't need to be explained or defended. Deep down, they know something is different. They sense alignment. And alignment is powerful because it can't be rushed, faked, or easily disrupted. When someone stops talking and starts aligning, something big is forming. Not overnight, not loudly, but steadily, intentionally, and with purpose. Silence is often the final stage before momentum becomes visible. And that's why it makes them nervous, because they know the quiet never lasts forever. There is always a shift right before elevation. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable unless you're paying attention. The energy around you tightens. Things that once flowed easily begin to change. Opportunities rearrange themselves in unexpected ways. Some doors close without explanation, while others appear with no announcement. Certain people drift away, not because of conflict, but because alignment has shifted. Others, who once overlooked you, suddenly become curious again. They check in. They ask questions. They pay closer attention. This isn't random, and it isn't coincidence. It's recognition. People feel change before they can name it. They sense when someone is approaching a higher level of themselves, even if they don't fully understand what that level looks like yet. You're giving off a different signal now. Not louder, not desperate, just resolved. You're no longer chasing approval. You don't measure your worth through external validation or constant affirmation. You've stopped being desperate for outcomes because you trust your process. You no longer try to prove your intelligence, your value, or your potential to anyone. That shift sends a powerful message. It tells the universe you're ready, and it tells the people around you that you're no longer operating from insecurity. Readiness isn't about confidence alone. It's about detachment from needing to be seen. When someone stops grasping for recognition, they often receive it naturally. People whisper when they sense inevitability. When they realize someone is stepping into a version of themselves that can't be delayed, redirected, or controlled. There's an understanding that forms quietly. This rise is happening, whether they support it or not, so they don't say it out loud. Instead, they smile to your face. They act supportive. They offer polite encouragement. But behind closed doors, the conversations change. Your name comes up differently now. He's smarter than we thought. She's more calculated than she lets on. They're not the same anymore. These aren't compliments spoken publicly. They're realizations spoken privately. And this isn't jealousy. Jealousy carries emotion and insecurity. What they're feeling is realization, awareness. The moment when they understand their original assessment of you was incomplete. They're noticing the distance. Distance doesn't always mean separation. Sometimes it's the gap between where someone is and where they're going. And that gap becomes uncomfortable when it starts to widen, especially when there's nothing they can do to close it. They can't rush your process. They can't distract your focus. They can't pull you back into old patterns, and that loss of influence creates unease. You didn't become smarter overnight. You didn't suddenly change who you are. What changed is your awareness. You became aware of patterns, how certain situations repeat until lessons are learned. You became aware of timing, when to move and when to wait. You became aware of your own power, not in an ego-driven way, but in a grounded, self-trusting way. Awareness changes behavior. It sharpens decision-making. It removes the need for approval. And once awareness locks in, there is no going back to unconscious living. People feel that. They sense that you're no longer available for distractions, detours, or diminishment. You're not rushing towards success, but you're also not avoiding it. You're aligned with it. That's what makes this phase powerful. You're not forcing growth. You're allowing it. You're not seeking permission. You're moving in rhythm with your own readiness, and readiness is undeniable. That's why they're afraid to say it out loud. Saying it would make it real. Saying it would mean admitting they misjudged you. Saying it would confirm what they already know but aren't ready to accept. Your rise doesn't need announcement. It's already in motion. And once motion turns into momentum, there's nothing left to debate. If you're hearing whispers, take it as confirmation, not a warning, not a distraction. Confirmation that something within you is working exactly as it should. Whispers don't follow stagnation. They follow movement that others don't fully understand yet. It means you're no longer blending into the background. You're no longer easy to influence, redirect, or mold into someone else's expectations. You're no longer available for manipulation, even when it's disguised as concern or advice. That alone signals growth most people never reach. At this stage, you don't need to defend yourself. Defense keeps you engaged in battles that aren't yours to fight. You don't need to correct rumors, because truth doesn't require explanation when it's supported by consistency. And you don't need to explain your growth, because growth speaks most clearly through outcomes. Your life will speak soon enough. Let them whisper. Whispers are what happen when people sense something, but don't yet have proof. They talk quietly because they're unsure, because they're watching, because they're trying to understand what they can't yet see clearly. Recognition always begins this way. Whispers come before acknowledgement, before respect, before acceptance. Stay disciplined. Discipline is what protects momentum when excitement fades. Stay patient. Patience keeps you from forcing results before they're ready. Stay grounded. Grounding keeps success from changing who you are once it arrives. Your intelligence is unfolding at the right pace, not rushed by pressure, not forced by expectation, not announced for attention. It's moving naturally, steadily, and with precision. That kind of growth lasts. You're not here to impress. You're here to build. You're not here to argue your worth. You're here to embody it. Every time you choose focus over noise, you strengthen what you're creating. Every time you choose silence over explanation, you protect your direction. This phase may feel lonely at times. Quiet often does, but quiet is where alignment happens. It's where decisions become intentional. It's where confidence settles into something unshakable. Loud success fades quickly. Quiet success endures. And when the results finally show, the whispers will change. They always do. Curiosity turns into certainty. Doubt turns into acknowledgement. What was once questioned becomes undeniable. Then the whispers turn into silence. Not because people stop noticing, but because there's nothing left to question. Your progress will speak with clarity. Your presence will answer what words never could. The smartest move you ever made wasn't reacting. It wasn't proving. It wasn't explaining. It was recognizing that your path didn't require permission. You didn't need witnesses to build something meaningful. And you never needed validation to know who you are becoming. You were always ahead. You just didn't announce it. Now others are beginning to see what you've known quietly all along. They're catching up to a version of you that's already moved forward. And by the time they fully understand it, you'll be standing in results, not explanations. Stay focused. Stay quiet. Let your work finish the conversation. As this message comes to an end, understand this clearly. Nothing you've experienced recently has been random. The distance you feel, the silence you've chosen, the shift in how people treat you, it's all part of alignment. When growth becomes internal before it becomes visible, confusion often appears first. That doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're recalibrating. You are no longer who you were when you started this journey. You don't react the same way. You don't tolerate the same patterns. You don't need the same validation. That isn't arrogance. That's maturity. That's self-respect. And self-respect always changes how others relate to you. Some people won't understand this version of you, and they don't have to. Understanding is not a requirement for progress. Alignment is. The moment you stopped explaining yourself was the moment your energy became protected. The moment you stopped chasing clarity from others was the moment you began trusting your own. That trust is powerful. Right now, you're in a phase where discipline matters more than motivation. Focus matters more than noise. Consistency matters more than attention. This is the stage where people either fall back into old habits or rise into something completely different. You've already shown which direction you're moving. Let go of the urge to prove anything. You don't need to convince anyone of your intelligence, your value, or your future. The strongest moves are made quietly. The most lasting success grows without announcement. When results arrive, explanations become unnecessary. If people are whispering, let them. Whispers are just delayed recognition. They're what happens when others sense change before they can measure it. You don't need to speed up to satisfy curiosity. You don't need to slow down to make others comfortable. Stay in rhythm with your own growth. Remember this: not everyone who leaves is a loss. Some departures are confirmations that alignment is working. Space creates clarity. Distance creates perspective. And perspective strengthens decision-making. You didn't become distant. You became intentional. From here on, choose presence over pressure. Choose clarity over chaos. Choose depth over display. Every time you choose focus instead of reaction, you reinforce the version of yourself that's being built right now. There will come a moment when the tension fades and momentum becomes visible, when effort turns into stability, when discipline turns into results. And when that happens, the conversations around you will change again. Not because you demanded respect, but because you earned it through consistency. Until then, protect your energy, guard your time, trust your instincts. You've already learned how to listen to yourself, and that's a skill most never develop. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where preparation turns into execution. Stay steady. Stay grounded. Keep building. This chapter isn't about being seen. It's about becoming. And when becoming is complete, being seen will happen naturally.